the last section, about Mary, and how could Mary have not understood who Jesus is? How could she think he was out of his mind? And that's a very good question, because I think it gets at the heart of a lot of what Mark is indicating to us. So we tend to think of faith as kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down thing. So surely because she knew some things about Jesus, she had it all set. But what we're seeing here is faith as relationship with Jesus means a continual repentance as you come to know more about him. And I think she did know some. I don't think she forgot things, but I think what happens sometimes for all of us is the old wineskins can be expectations about how Jesus, okay, if this is who Jesus is, then he should act this way. You guys don't do that, right? Yeah. And so Jesus has to keep, in order for us to receive what he's actually giving, he has to keep confronting us in those places where we've become blind to him because we have our expectations or our assumptions about how he should work or what he should do. I'll just give you a quick example. My son and daughter-in-law had a baby a couple months ago, their first, and she started having all kinds of problems, infections, this kind of thing. And I knew they would be struggling anyway as new parents, so I knew what to tell God to do. You need to heal her, like now, So, so I would pray, please heal her of this infection. And the next thing I found out, she was in the hospital because it was getting worse. Like, no, that's not the direction I'm telling you this needs to go in. So I ended up going to pick up the baby and kept him while she was in the hospital, which was, again, not my plan. And then she had developed something that's like so rare that only like 10 people get it. And it's almost never healed, unless you could do surgery or whatever. So it was like I started thinking maybe nobody should ask me to pray for them because seriously, it tends to go in the other direction. But as I was becoming more frustrated with God, I heard him say, do you honestly believe that you love them more than I do? Do you honestly believe that I am not working out my good purposes for them in the midst of this? See, I had to die to I was beginning to have a relationship with Jesus that was based totally on my expectations of how he should work. And out of his love, he had to help me to see that he was doing something deeper in them and in me that required laying that down. And I think that's what we see here with Mary. The point isn't to say, well, Mary should have known or Mary shouldn't have known. See, that's where we tend to go because we have this sort of static view about faith. But it's the same thing with any friendship that you have. All relationships have some sort of dying to yourself, dying to the way you're thinking about this person because you need to keep receiving what they're saying, because hopefully they're growing and changing too. You can't leave them stuck. Nobody likes to be stuck, right? When you first left your family's home, didn't you want them to recognize how grown up you were now? When you came back, like, oh my, I'm so different. Don't treat me like I'm 5. We do this all the time. That's why we need to keep seeing what Mark is really attempting to help us to see. He's not trying to get us to have a bad understanding about Mary, but even Mary with her expectations needed to have that renewing and repenting. Okay, so having said that, again, first thing I want to ask you, just in general, reading over the whole thing, what were your observations and any questions that you have about this section? Okay, here is a really big word here. Absolutely. Excellent. What else?
And it's funny that more than once Jesus says, he who has ears, let him hear. So everyone has ears.
Okay.
There is something about the way we hear that he's trying to bring out.
Excellent. Yes, he doesn't just say listen, but he has this interesting statement, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Right, so he's trying to get them to reflect on, well, I have ears to hear. What are you saying by that? Good. Yeah, what else?
I noticed that he spoke many things in parables, but doesn't mean that every parable we see in Scripture is a parable that he taught.
Okay, we don't end up hearing all the parables, right? He taught many parables, but at this point, Mark is just going to tell us this one, and he tells it in the context of teaching them other parables, right? Which is an important thing to notice.
I don't know the significance of it, but he seems to make that detail that teaching by the sea.
Yes, he oftentimes will mention that he's teaching by the sea. That's exactly right. And I'm not sure, what exactly the significance is either, but yeah. It might be partly that it's an eyewitness, like Peter is saying, and then we were beside the sea again, and...
This dynamic relationship keeps coming to my mind. Because he basically says with all the story he tells, if you listen and you have ears, then growth keeps occurring in different ways, but and if you don't listen, even what you have will be taken away.
Right.
It's like no static.
Right.
You're either not growing and growing worse.
There you go, right. He's basically saying you don't just stand in the same place. If you keep listening, something occurs, but if you stop, something occurs too. Right.
Not only to hear, but to understand.
Okay, so there's the idea of, so that seems to be getting at more, what is hearing? What does he mean by hearing? There must be, again, more to it than just the words hitting your ear, right? Good.
So, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So verse 11 and 12 confound me a little bit. I had to go back and read Isaiah 6. I think Jesus is quoting Isaiah 6 here. So that they may indeed see but not perceive, and that they may indeed hear and not understand, lest they should turn and be forgiven.
Right. I was hoping somebody would be a little concerned about that. Yeah, we're going to talk about it.
Well, it's funny because I actually gave a sermon on this passage, and that crushed me because I really didn't know what that really meant.
Right.
I went back to Isaiah, and it's basically just quoting Isaiah. So, what say you, O wise one?
Oh, thank you. We'll work on that. No, I will, I promise.
I'm looking at verse 24, when it said, pay attention to what you hear. What measure you give is to be measured by. What hearing and giving has to do.
Yes, right. Give, another translation, I think RSV says, give heed what you hear, the measure you give of heed, of attention, you'll get more back. Yes.
In verse 17, talk about not having roots in you. So when you have the roots in you and you try to hit, you will endure for a while. But when you try to hit you, when you try to hit you, you will stay away.
Okay, so you have the image of being rooted in him. Again, hearing seems to be connected to understanding, and therefore having a root that withstands things that come up. Good.
And we get more of a glimpse of what the kingdom of God is, because he says, these are the secrets.
Mm-hmm.
You'll know the secret of the kingdom.
Okay, he says, he says, you have the secret, right? Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
I think in relation to what Richard was asking, the way I perceive it is God has a time and purpose for everyone, that all should know him, but in a certain time and in a way that we choose in this time.
Okay, and that's good. That's fine. We'll see what Mark is saying here, though, right? I'm so mean. I don't mean to be. Yes?
Feedback, because Jesus was, he started out like in the synagogue and stuff. Could it be that when he went to the seashore and sit in the boat and not stand in the boat and speak, that he get a different cross-section of the people instead of the ones who sit in the synagogues in high places, they had the first seats outside by the sea, then there will be different type of people who would really get in.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, he certainly has more than just the synagogue here, right? Exactly. All right, so let's work our way through it. We're going to first just look, we're going to take it one section at a time. First, we're going to look at the actual parable, all right? So, again, he began to teach beside the sea, and a very large crowd gathered around him. So they got into a boat, and he sat in it on the sea, and the whole crowd was beside the sea on the land. Got the picture? Okay. He gets in the boat and goes out because it's easier for everybody to see and hear him, all right? And you can imagine if you're on the beach and you're trying to teach people and all these other people are around you on the beach, it's going to be helpful if you step out. And again, I'll tell you a funny story. When we used to do these studies, these week-long studies in the first half of March, when I worked for InterVarsity in Southern California, we would go to a camp on Catalina Island. So we were actually out on an island. So one of my fellow colleagues got the brilliant idea of reenacting this section. So we got the class to come down, and he got in the boat, but he stood up to teach them. Woo! So when he gets out, collects his manuscript, and walks back up, he finds that one of the students has written on the board, and he sat down. It became a famous story that came around every year. Okay, already commented, yes, he's teaching them many things in parables. So it appears from what Mark is telling us is that this is one of the things, they've already been listening for a while, and in his teaching he said, listen, behold, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured it. Other seed fell on rocky ground where it did not have much soil, and immediately it sprang up, since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched. Since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain. And other seeds fell among the good soil and produced grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30-fold, 60-fold, and 100-fold. And he said, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. All right, so just in the parable, notice, he begins and he ends with a word about hearing, right? Now, if I was to say to you, listen, and then I went on talking, what am I trying to get you to do? Yeah. And I'm actually trying to say, even if you think you're paying attention, you need to really pay attention now, because what I'm about to say is important. So Jesus says that. He says, listen. And then he gives this interesting farm story. And he says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now, yeah, how are you going to respond to that? I'm going to go away thinking, okay, that was interesting. So there's something I'm supposed to hear there. What is it? Okay. So let me say something. This would be one of those places you want some background. You may already know the background on farming at this time, but this would be the way they would farm. We often farm now where we, get the land ready first. But they would scatter the seed, and then they would turn the soil under. And so, yes, some seed would land on a path that was so hard that the birds would eat it because it wouldn't even penetrate into the earth. And some would end up around weeds. Of course, you wouldn't know that until the weeds grew up, okay? And some would end up in very shallow soil. How do you know that? Because when it rises and the sun hits it, it dies. So you don't really know what kind of soil is exactly when you first scatter it, all right? The seed kind of brings it out a little bit. So they would just be going, okay. But there's something very, very, very unusual in this story that they would not expect to hear. And that is the last line. He says, when the seed is in good soil, it yields 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. Primitive farming at that time would yield 3 to 6-fold. Modern farming techniques, from what I've been told, yields 16. So what is Jesus saying here? That This story is about a seed that will yield far beyond anything that you would ever in your wildest dreams expect when it's in good soil. And then he says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. So his story is about something miraculous, some kind of seed, something that has so much life in it that it will give back more than you could ever imagine. Right? Okay. So, afterwards, Mark tells us, let me find my passage again. When he was alone, those around him with the 12, okay? So, those around him with the 12, they ask him about the parables. That's all they do. They hear the parables and they say, oh my gosh. I mean, if you were a farmer and you really took this as meaning that he has some kind of seed, would you not want to come and say to him, where in the world do you get seed like that? 30-fold, 60-fold, 100, that's amazing. I want that. Now, if you didn't think he was talking about seed, wouldn't you be curious to know what he means about something that produces so much more than what you start with? Wouldn't you want to know? Right? And so they do. They come and ask him for more. Tell us more about it. They don't come saying, oh, I know what that means. Let me tell you my interpretation of that parable. They just come with their questions. That's it. And Jesus, instead of immediately answering them about the parables, what does he say? To you has been given the secret of the kingdom. That's unexpected. What have they done to merit that kind of response from Jesus? What is the one thing we've been told they do? They follow. And they follow in a way where they are willing to ask questions. Following seems to mean, I don't get this. Tell me more. What are you talking about? So following apparently doesn't necessarily mean that you understand everything. It means being willing to ask questions. And Jesus says, you came to the right place. In fact, to you has been given the secret of the kingdom. Now, the word secret there means mystery in Greek. It's mystery. And the biblical understanding of mystery is, it is something that only God can reveal. In other words, it's not secret like I don't want you to know. The point is, you have come and had revealed to you what only God can reveal in terms of the kingdom. That's what he's saying. All right, so hold on to that because we're going to talk about it a little bit more. And then he says, but to those who are on outside, everything is, or you could say remains, in parables. All right, so who's on the outside? Well, this is the people who decided to go home and say, well, how was it? What was the teacher like? Oh, I don't know, some stupid story about a seed, 30-fold, 60-fold, I don't know. I mean, it's just dumb, because you don't have seed like that, so I just came home. I was hungry anyway, I don't care. Okay, so what does that person have? A parable. They don't have a whole lot. It remains a parable, doesn't it? It remains enigmatic. Why? Because they didn't come and ask. They didn't come to Jesus. They were satisfied merely to have the parable. That was it. When Jesus says, he who has ears to hear and listen, and he rewards these people with these words about the secret of the kingdom, what is he saying it means to have ears to hear? to keep going to him, to follow him. Exactly. To know that you need more. That's what it means. And he says, bingo, the parable did its job. It brought you to me. It brought you to me. And that's what its intention is. So now I can tell you more. Because he's giving us a real relationship. If all he was giving us was teaching, he could just pass it off. But if what he's up to, if this king is up to bringing people to himself, to bringing people to follow him, then doesn't it make sense that the parable's purpose isn't to just sit as a good story, but to bring them to ask for more? To be ready to be receptive to hear more. Tell me more. I'm fascinated. What are you talking about? All right. So then it goes on and it says, so that. All right. Now, so that can mean two things. It can mean the purpose or the result. But this is the result. What is the result of having everything remain in parables? The result is that they may indeed see, but they don't really perceive. Of course they don't. They may hear, but they don't understand. Because if they did, what would they do? They would turn and be forgiven, and that is not what they're doing right now. Right? They're not willing to come at this point. Now, it might be that God's, to go back to your original thing, it might be that there are times where God isn't as clearly speaking to us and all that. But here, what I want us to see is, in the context of the story, what does Mark seem to be helping his readers to see and remember? And again, why? Why? Because so often we'll stop short of continuing towards Jesus to know what he's saying because we think we already know. We got enough. We oftentimes live our relationship with Jesus in a sort of bizarre, impersonal way, which you wouldn't necessarily do with other people. One of Gary's favorite examples is, how many of us say, now that we're married, we don't need to live together? Now that we're married, we don't have to spend any time together. Now that you're my friend, we will never have to talk again. Oh, good. Is that what relationship is? Of course not. And do I, as your friend, end up learning more by spending time with you? In fact, I'm even changed in the midst of that by the interaction, and so are you. It grows. It's dynamic, and more word occurs. But if I choose to say, well, I read your resume, I know everything there is to know about you, what do I truly have? Just a resume. And even that becomes nothing, because if I try to perceive you according to your resume, do I see you clearly? No, I don't. You can't. You absolutely can't. That's exactly right. All right, hold on. See where I am on this. Oh, here we go. Okay, so a lot of that section that's so hard for us to get, I think, has to do with being able to see the context. You have to see what's going on. Notice also he uses the word outside. The word outside was used in the story right before this. Who stood outside? The family did. And they called into him. But they remained at that point outside. They didn't come in to hear. They were going to impose at that point what they wanted Jesus to do. Again, did they know what Jesus was teaching? No, not at that point. They weren't receiving it from him because they weren't coming inside. So is there a consequence to staying outside? Absolutely. Do you ever hear a marriage counselor saying, look, the best advice I have for you is never talk again? Absolutely not. It would go against everything that a relationship is to do that. All right, the word lest it really means with the possibility that they might not turn. The point isn't therefore they will not turn, but the real consequence might be that they won't turn and be forgiven. So does that help on that?
It does, and it's another translation.
It's another translation thing, exactly.
When I read it in another translation, and it's clearer, because they use another word, not less.
Yes, that's right. And this is one of those times where where you would want to do. And this is one of those times where I don't like ESV as much. But that's the way, you kind of have to keep deciding. But it's helpful to look at other ones to see what's going on, exactly. And if you decide to check the biblos.com out, the word is mepote, and you would find out a little bit more about what that word means, which might help also in your translation. But does Jesus really plan on keeping this hidden from them? Is there any hint in the passage itself that would tell us something about God's purpose? Like towards the end of the passage, what does he say there? A light is what? To be, yeah. So in other words, the whole purpose of what I'm up to is for revelation. So no matter what you're struggling with, make sure, again, it's always good news, make sure you struggle with it enough to try to figure out what's going on. He must be saying something that if I don't understand it totally, I can look at this part and say, well, clearly his intention is in order for everyone to know. So what's going on here? What is this supposed to mean? And then hopefully as you try to check out the story, you begin to see, it would be outrageous to go home and yawn at the parable. And to think then you know everything you need to know about this Jesus because you heard his interesting story. Okay, we're going to I think we might as well stop because we only have about 5 more minutes. And it might be more helpful to finish this section when we have a little bit more time, okay?